So let's move on then to the main focus of today's workshop, which is of course, structure, style, and clarity. And I will begin, of course, by talking about structure. So for structure, I'm going to focus on a typical essay structure because this is the foundation of academic writing. So typically you will have three main parts in an academic essay. You'll have an introduction, you'll have a body, and then you'll have a conclusion. For the body section, the number of paragraphs that you'll have will often depend on the word requirement that you have in an assignment. Of course, if you have a very short assignment, maybe you will just have a few body paragraphs, maybe following this 5 paragraph essay structure here. However, if you have, let's say, 5,000 words as your requirement, then you will have a lot more body paragraphs than just three, right? But you can use the same basic structure and you can follow the kind of order that I have here. So in particular for your introduction, the focus is on kind of guiding your reader towards understanding the topic a little more and thinking about how this topic is relevant or maybe introducing the context of the topic. So you'll introduce using some background information. And then in the introduction, what generally tends to be the most important in an academic assignment is your thesis statement, right? So for an argumentative essay, let's say this will be your main argument that runs throughout the whole essay, right? For other kinds of essays, maybe like problem and solution essays, right? You might have something slightly different, but it will be a kind of sentence that will tell you exactly which problems you will discuss and what kinds of solutions you may suggest. It will give you a kind of guide. Okay, so it will give the reader an idea of what to expect, right? But generally, your thesis statement is the main idea that runs throughout the whole essay. Then for each of the body paragraphs, you can follow PEEL, right? So PEEL, right? And you can add an extra E in the middle as well if you want to remember that. So PEEL, right? So essentially what that stands for is point, example, or evidence, explain, and link, right? So I tend to think of it as point, evidence, explain, link, but of course you can also think of it as point, example, explain, and then link. So for each body paragraph, try to think of a main point that supports your thesis, right? And this has to be something that is, of course, relevant to the topic and helps you to support what you are arguing, right? So you have to have a main point, and this can be in your topic sentence. Then, after your main point, you can think of an example or perhaps some evidence. And this is probably the most likely in an academic situation, right? Of course, your professor or tutor may have given you some reading to do or has asked you to do some research. So, for your evidence, it's something that should support your point or be connected to it. And then, once you've included that with relevant citations, right, you should explain it, right? Explain how your example or your evidence connects to your main point, how it supports it, right? And then once you've explained it, you can add a link. So the link is optional, which is why I've put it in brackets like that, right? So for the link, you can try to either link your first main point, let's say, to the next main point, right? And this could actually come at the end of the first body paragraph or at the beginning of the next body paragraph. Or the link could also connect back to the overall thesis statement, right? So you're showing how, what I've just argued for this point supports my thesis in this way, right? And you can actually repeat a similar structure for each of your body paragraphs. Of course, there is some flexibility. You don't have to have like point, example, explain, link for every single paragraph like that. You can adjust it slightly, right? So sometimes you may wish to explain a point in a little more detail before you mention an example and then explain it in more detail. Then there is some flexibility, but do try to remember for each body paragraph to have those elements: point, example, explain, and link. Or for the example, it could be some evidence. Then when you reach the conclusion, try to summarize your key points. It's a way to wrap up your essay. And of course, it can be a space where you can restate your thesis. So that's the general structure.